What if I told you that nearly everything you think you know about love, romance, and relationships in the medieval world is a carefully constructed fantasy? What if I told you that the sweeping, passionate love stories you've seen in movies like A Knight's Tale or read about in sagas like Game of Thrones are based on what was once considered radical, dangerous propaganda? An idea so revolutionary that the medieval church, the most powerful institution in Europe, fought tooth and nail to suppress it, seeing it as a threat to the very fabric of Christian civilization. Here's a fact that will fundamentally change how you see the history of the human heart. According to 12th century medical texts, including those by the influential physician Constantinus Africanus, the experience we call falling in love was literally classified as a mental illness. It was called amor hurios, or lovesickness. Its symptoms included obsessive thoughts, loss of appetite, and a melancholic fixation on a single person. What did medieval doctors prescribe for this malady? Cold baths, bloodletting, bland diets, and in serious cases, even exorcisms. They believed romantic passion was a disease of the soul that needed to be purged. If that sounds utterly insane, you are beginning to grasp the chasm between their world and ours. The concept of choosing your marriage partner based on love, an idea that seems as natural to us as breathing, was so profoundly revolutionary in medieval times that it could get you excommunicated from the church, stripped of your lands, or worse. It was an idea that tore families apart, destabilized kingdoms, and ignited wars. You are going to discover the real, secret history of this romantic revolution. This is not a dry history lesson. This is the origin story of your own heart. You're going to learn how a powerful and brilliant queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, used the concept of love as a political weapon that redrew the map of Europe. You'll meet the poets who became cultural revolutionaries, spreading these dangerous new ideas through viral songs. And most importantly, you'll see how the gender roles, courtship rituals, and impossible expectations they invented are still profoundly impacting your dating life, your relationship goals, and your deepest romantic anxieties today. Get ready, because you have never heard the story of love told this way before. Marriage as a merger. Before we storm the castle of romance, we must first understand the cold, hard reality of the prison it was rebelling against. Forget the fairy tales. For the medieval nobility, marriage wasn't a sacred union of two souls. It was a corporate merger, and women were the primary assets. You are a 12-year-old girl, the daughter of a powerful duke. Your father has just informed you that you are to be married next month to a 40-year-old warlord you have never met. You will not see him before the wedding day. His primary interest in you is the vast tract of land, including 3 castles and 2 port towns, that constitutes your dowry. Your consent is not requested. Your feelings are not a factor. This was not a worst-case scenario. This was a Tuesday in the High Middle Ages. According to great French historian Georges Duby, aristocratic marriage in the 12th century was almost exclusively a tool for political and economic alliance. Love was not on the checklist. While technically required by a developing body of church law, was often a legal fiction. Marriages were strategic alliances, arranged by patriarchs to consolidate territory, secure military allegiances, and above all, to transfer wealth and produce a legitimate male heir to inherit it. The surviving marriage contracts from this era are chilling in their transactional nature. They read not like romantic declarations, but like modern business agreements, scrutinized by lawyers and sealed by witnesses. They specify, in painstaking detail, the transfer of estates, the number of armed soldiers a family would provide in case of war, the political titles that would be passed down, and severe financial penalties if a male heir wasn't produced within a certain number of years. There was more discernible passion in a modern software license agreement. The legal reality of this arrangement was grim under pervasive legal doctrine of coverture, which was solidifying across Europe. A married woman ceased to exist as an independent legal entity. Her identity was covered by that of her husband. She could not own property in her own name. She could not sign contracts. She could not sue or be sued. And she could not write a valid will without his explicit permission. She was, in the cold eyes of the law, his chattel, a valuable piece of property, but property nonetheless. And what of the church, the supposed guardian of spiritual life? Its official stance on love and marriage was a thicket of contradictions and profound suspicion. The teachings of St. Augustine, the 4th century bishop whose thought cast a long shadow over the entire medieval period, framed all sexual desire as inherently sinful, a corrupting consequence of humanity's fall from grace in the Garden of Eden. Even within the sanctified bonds of marriage, the act of sex was viewed as a regrettable necessity, a concession to human weakness for the sole purpose of procreation, writing in the 6th century, teaching that any pleasure derived from the act, even with one's own spouse, was a sin that stained the soul and required penance and confession. He advised that couples should abstain from intimacy on Sundays, on all holy days, during Lent, during a woman's menstrual cycle, during pregnancy, and for 40 days after childbirth. It left precious few days a year when marital intimacy was not viewed with deep clerical suspicion. The ideal Christian marriage was a chaste, brother-sisterly companionship. Joy was not the goal. This was the world Eleanor of Aquitaine was born into, a world where marriage was a political prison. A woman's body was a vessel for dynastic succession, and love was officially classified as a form of madness. But Eleanor was not just any woman. She was about to set that world on fire. Love as a political weapon. Eleanor of Aquitaine was, without exaggeration, the most eligible bachelorette in 12th century Europe. As the sole heir to the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine, a territory encompassing nearly a third of modern-day France, she controlled more land and resources than the King of France himself. Her first marriage was a perfect example of the system she would come to dismantle, the royalist political alliance with the pious and monkish King Louis VII of France. The marriage was, by all contemporary accounts, a spectacular disaster. Eleanor, raised in the sophisticated and culturally vibrant south of France, was brilliant, worldly, and assertive, obsessively religious, and completely overwhelmed by his vivacious wife. During the Second Crusade, which she accompanied him on, her behavior scandalized the French court. After 15 years and only 2 daughters, Eleanor famously complained that she had married a monk, not a king. So, in 1152, she did the unthinkable. In a move of breathtaking political audacity, she demanded and secured an annulment from the church, using the convenient pretext of consanguinity, that she and Louis were too closely related by blood for the marriage to be valid. For a queen to initiate the dissolution of a royal marriage was virtually unheard of. It was a scandal that rocked Christendom. What she did next was a geopolitical earthquake. A mere 8 weeks after her marriage to the King of France was declared void, she married the younger, more dynamic, and fiercely ambitious Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. In medieval terms, 8 weeks was the blink of an eye. The speed of the transition sent shockwaves across Europe, making it clear this was a carefully calculated power play. This wasn't just a divorce and remarriage. It was a seismic shift in the balance of European power. By marrying Henry, Eleanor transferred the entire Duchy of Aquitaine from the sphere of French influence to that of his growing empire. 2 years later, when Henry ascended to the English throne as King Henry II, the Angevin Empire was born, a massive territory that stretched from the borders of Scotland down to the Pyrenees in southern France. Eleanor's romantic and political choice had created an English empire on French soil, setting the stage for the next 300 years of bloody conflict between the two nations, most notably the 100 Years' War. Her personal decision had redrawn the map of Europe, but Eleanor's true revolution was not fought on the battlefield. It was a revolution of the heart, waged in the halls of her own court. After establishing her court at Poitiers, separate from Henry's in England, she cultivated an environment that became the epicenter of a new and dangerous idea, courtly love. Her court became a laboratory for inventing a new way to live and love, a glittering think tank for the romantic arts that would export its ideas across the continent. The revolutionaries of romance, troubadours in the art of courtly love. Eleanor's court at Poitiers became a dazzling magnet for the most innovative artists, poets, and thinkers of the age. The troubadours, the lyric poets and musicians from southern France, were elevated from regional performers to international superstars. The very word troubadour comes from the Occitan verb trobar, which means to find or to invent, and that is precisely what they did. They invented a completely new way to think and sing about love. The first and arguably most influential of these figures was none other than Eleanor's own grandfather, William IX of Aquitaine, a man whose lusty and shockingly secular poems celebrated romantic pleasure and female agency. But it was in Eleanor's court that this tradition was refined into a sophisticated cultural movement. These weren't just entertainers. They were cultural revolutionaries who created an entirely new code of romantic conduct. They called it fin amour, or refined love. This was a love based not on duty or dynastic obligation, but on voluntary admiration, spiritual devotion, and personal choice. This love had several key characteristics that made it utterly subversive. It was almost always extramarital. It was often secret, a delicious conspiracy between the lover and his beloved. It was frequently based on the ideal of unattainability. The longing and service were more important than the consummation. In the world of courtly love, a knight would pledge his service not just to his feudal lord, but to a noble lady who was often the wife of his lord. He would perform great deeds of valor in her honor, wear her colors in tournaments, and compose beautiful poetry extolling her virtues. The purpose of this love was to ennoble him, to elevate his character, and make him a better, more courageous, and more virtuous man. This was a direct and profound challenge to the church's worldview. The troubadours were essentially proposing a secular path to salvation, suggesting that earthly, romantic love could be a force for moral and spiritual improvement. It was a new religion, with the beloved lady taking the place of the Virgin Mary, and the suffering lover taking the place of the devout worshiper. This new culture became so fashionable and influential that Eleanor's own daughter, Marie de Champagne, commissioned a cleric named Andreas Capellanus to write a definitive guide. His book de Amore, The Art of Courtly Love, written around 1184, became the world's first dating manual. It was a systematic, almost legalistic treatise on this new romantic code. It laid out specific rules that sound shockingly modern in their psychological acuity. Marriage is no real excuse for not loving. He who is not jealous cannot love. The easy attainment of love makes it of little value. Difficulty of attainment makes a prize. With rules like these, Capellanus was codifying a system where the most desirable love was a love that was most difficult, fraught with obstacles, and just out of reach. He was, in a very real and tangible sense, inventing the psychological framework for friend zone and framing the state of longing and frustration as a noble and spiritually enriching ideal. These ideas were not just confined to books, they were performed. The poems of the troubadours were set to music and sung in courts across Europe, becoming a powerful and seductive form of multimedia propaganda for this new romantic ideology. The perfect prison, how courtly love reshaped gender. This new romantic ideal, while seemingly empowering, had profound and deeply contradictory impact on women and men, creating idealized gender roles that were a kind of perfect prison. On one hand, courtly love elevated elite women to a position of unprecedented cultural authority. In this new game, they were no longer just passive pawns in their father's political chess matches. They were the arbiters of taste, the judges of a man's worth, the inspirational muses whose favor could turn a simple knight into a celebrated hero. The lady became the symbolic center of the romantic universe, her virtue and beauty the source of all that was good and noble in the world. But this pedestal was also a cage. The ideal courtly lady, as depicted in the romances of authors like Chrétien de Troyes, who also wrote under the patronage of Eleanor's daughter Marie, was a fundamentally passive object of admiration. Her primary role was to be beautiful, virtuous, and unattainable. She was meant to inspire great deeds, not perform them herself. Her power was entirely symbolic, confined to the realm of courtship and desire. The moment a real woman, like Eleanor of Aquitaine, stepped off this pedestal to exercise tangible political or military power, she was condemned by the very same chroniclers who praise her as a patron of culture. She was called unnatural, unwomanly, and dangerously ambitious. Courtly love celebrated female power only as long as it remained decorative. This created a psychological trap that has echoed down the centuries. Women were told they were divine, but only if they remained within the narrow confines of an idealized, often passive, femininity. The damsel in distress archetype, the beautiful and helpless woman waiting to be rescued by a heroic man, was not a timeless trope. It was a specific invention of this period. For men, courtly love created the equally impossible standard of chivalry. The ideal knight was a walking contradiction. He had to be a ferocious and deadly warrior on the battlefield, but a gentle, sensitive poet in the ladies' chamber. He was expected to be consumed by a burning passion for his beloved, yet remain chaste and respectful of her honor, content with a smile or a ribbon as his reward. He had to be utterly subservient to his lady's whims while maintaining his masculine authority in all other aspects of life. These ideals, the passive, perfect lady and the sensitive, heroic knight, became so deeply embedded in the DNA of Western culture that they evolved into gender stereotypes we still contend with today. The expectation that men should be strong providers and protectors who are also emotionally articulate and that women should be both successful and independent, yet gracefully feminine and romantically receptive, are the direct descendants of these medieval contradictions. The entire framework created a fundamental psychological split between passionate, idealized true love and the practical, day-to-day reality of married life, a division that continues to cause immense confusion and disappointment in modern relationships. The Church strikes back, a war on love. The Church saw this romantic revolution for exactly what it was, a direct and dangerous assault on its authority and its entire worldview. The movement's core tenets were a catalog of sins. It celebrated adulterous love. It encouraged a form of idolatry by placing a human woman in the place of God, and it proposed a secular path to spiritual fulfillment that bypassed the Church entirely. The clerical establishment launched a full-scale cultural war to crush this romantic heresy. Pope Innocent III and numerous church councils issued decrees condemning the lascivious songs of the troubadours and the immoral tales of the Romance writers. They forbade clergy from attending performances of secular love poetry and threatened patrons with spiritual sanction. In the early 13th century, this cultural war turned into a literal one. The Albigensian Crusade, a brutal 20-year military campaign, was launched by the Pope and the French crown against the Cathar heretics in southern France. While the primary target was the Cathar religion, it is no coincidence that the Crusade also systematically destroyed the vibrant, independent, courtly culture of the region that had given birth to the troubadours. Castles were razed, libraries were burned, and the Occitan language and its poetic tradition were driven to the brink of extinction. Church authorities also employed censorship. They pressured universities, like the one in Paris, to ban the teaching of wildly popular and scandalous works like the Romance of the Rose. And they used their most potent spiritual weapon to be excommunicated in medieval Europe, was to suffer a kind of social and spiritual death. Several prominent troubadours were threatened with this fate for their corruption of Christian morals. In a brilliant stroke of counterpropaganda, the Church even co-opted the movement's own literature. The final section of Andreas Capellanus' De Amore, which for 2 books had lovingly detailed the rules of the romantic game, is a sudden and shocking renunciation of everything that came before it. Andreas unleashes a misogynistic and vicious tirade against women and condemns romantic love as a sinful, soul-destroying path to damnation. The book was a Trojan horse, designed to lure readers in with the allure of romance only to hit them with a sledgehammer of orthodox condemnation. But the Church's campaign was ultimately a partial failure. The harder they fought against these ideas, the more exciting and rebellious they seemed. By trying to censor the literature, they only increased its mystique. And most importantly, they were too late. The seeds of the Romantic Revolution had already been scattered across Europe, and they had taken root in the fertile ground of human desire. The idea that personal feelings mattered had been unleashed, and it could not be put back in its cage. From parchment to pixels, the 900-year legacy, the ideas forged in Eleanor's court, did not die with the Middle Ages. Instead, they shape-shifted, evolving through the centuries until they became the unquestioned foundation of our modern romantic lives. The Renaissance saw poets like Petrarch take the externalized drama of courtly love and internalize it, transforming it into a deeply psychological and personal exploration of the self. Then came the Protestant Reformation, which, in a great historical irony, saved romantic love by bringing it inside marriage. Martin Luther and other reformers rejected clerical celibacy and championed marriage as the ideal state, arguing that a loving, companionate partnership was a holy institution. This was a monumental shift. The passion of the troubadours was finally fused with the practicality of married life. The invention of the printing press and the rise of the novel in the 17th and 18th centuries democratized these ideals, spreading them from the aristocracy to the emerging middle class. Stories of love triumphing over social barriers became bestsellers. By the 19th century, the Romantic poets had elevated this concept to its zenith, arguing that passionate, transformative love was the single most important and meaningful experience a human being could have, a goal more important than wealth, status, or even life itself. This brings us to today. The medieval ghosts of courtly love haunt our digital world. Your dating app profile is a modern coat of arms, a curated display of your virtues and status designed to attract a worthy suitor. Swiping left or right is the 21st century equivalent of a lady granting or withholding her favor in a tournament. The dizzying search for an instant spark or chemistry is a direct descendant of the troubadour's belief in a love that was instantaneous, overwhelming, and divinely ordained. The modern nice guy, who complains of being in the friend zone, is unknowingly echoing the laments of a medieval knight performing endless service for a lady who will not grant him her final reward. Every time a movie ends with a grand, public romantic gesture, every time we feel the pressure to have a perfect Instagrammable relationship, every time we believe that the right person will complete us and solve all our problems, we are living out a script that was written 9 centuries ago by French nobles playing a sophisticated game of the heart, rewriting the rules of love. What is the ultimate lesson from this incredible journey? Our most deeply held beliefs about love are not natural, timeless, or inevitable. They are a cultural inheritance, an invention, a set of rules from a game designed for a world that no longer exists. The people of the Middle Ages were not so different from us. They longed for connection, for passion, for a sense of personal meaning in their relationships. The Romantic Revolution succeeded because it gave them a language and a framework to validate those desires against a system that told them their feelings were irrelevant. Eleanor of Aquitaine and the troubadours proved that culture is not fixed. It can be challenged, changed, and reinvented through a combination of political ambition and artistic expression. We have the chance to do it. Understanding this history is not about rejecting love. It is about liberation. It frees us from the tyranny of inherited expectations. It allows us to look at our own romantic scripts and ask what parts of this 900-year-old legacy are still serving us. The impossible gender standards, the romanticization of suffering, the split between passion and partnership. Are we finally ready to leave behind? The story of medieval romance is not over. It is still being written in every relationship we form, in every choice we make. By understanding where our ideas came from, we gain the power to decide where they will go next. Eleanor of Aquitaine started a revolution when she chose her own heart over her duty. That revolution is now in our hands. The question is, what chapter will we write?